just quickly, I know there's lots flying at us. So, again, I will reiterate where we're at. Mr. Cooper has moved a sub-amendment. Mr. Cooper, if you could graciously speak to it just so that we have some clarity for colleagues, then, of course, you are permitted to speak to it at whatever length you desire. From that point in time, we will go to Mr. Gerritsen, followed by Madame Romanado, followed by Madame Gaudreau, and if the list is exhausted at that point, of course, we will vote on the sub-amendment, and depending on the direction we get there, we will move back to our long and comprehensive speaking list number 2, which I alluded to a moment ago. So with that, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yes, I will just read the motion, the amendment, the sub-amendment again, and then just explain if there's any clarity needed, and then speak to the substance of the sub-amendment. So the sub-amendment reads as follows: that the amendment be amended by A, adding after the committee where it first appears the following: after it has completed its study on foreign election interference, and B, deleting all the words after the words "to the House." So just for clarity, what the motion as amended, if this sub-amendment were adopted, it would be amended to read as follows: that the committee, after it has completed its study on foreign election interference, invite the following individuals A to L, and it would remove that the report of the study be returned no later than October 31st, 2024. It would remove that date. So that is the sub-amendment. And is it a point of clarification, Ms. Romanado?
Okay, Ms. Romanado.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding which first word reference the committee. So pursuant to Standing Order 1083, comma, the committee after, is that where you're putting it? I just want to know where he's adding that addition, the A and the B.
Yes, that's correct.
And the rest stays the same, except at the end, the no later than October 31st. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
look at this.
Madame
Conservatives
Romanado,
and liberals agreeing
Mr.
on
Cooper,
things.
floor
Look at
remains
this.
yours.
Actually getting work
thank you
done.
very much, Mr. Chair. And this is about setting priorities. It's about setting priorities between ourselves versus fulfilling our responsibility to provide oversight and to hold the government accountable on a matter of significant importance and significant concern, and that is foreign interference, particularly by the Beijing-based communist regime, in our sovereignty, in our democracy, and in our elections. The report of Madam Justice Hogue is a damning indictment of Justin Trudeau and his government. Madam Justice Hogue confirmed that, quote, interference occurred in the last two general elections, and that, quote, the right of Canadians to have their electoral processes and democratic institutions free from covert influence, end of quote, had been impacted in those elections. This is something that Justin Trudeau turned a blind eye to in terms of interference that was taking place in the 2019 and 2021 elections, notwithstanding that he had been repeatedly briefed and warned by the security and intelligence establishment. Then he attempted to cover up what he knew and downplayed the extent of Beijing's interference. Madam Justice Hogue, on the contrary, confirmed the credible reports from Global News and the Globe and Mail that were first reported in the fall of 2022, and that is, as I said, that Justin Trudeau was warned about Beijing's interference, that he did nothing to stop it, that he worked to cover it up, and not only that, but that in certain instances, Justin Trudeau was complicit in Beijing's interference where it benefited himself and the Liberal Party. Among the most damning findings in Madam Justice Hogue's report is how Justin Trudeau handled Beijing's interference in the 2019 Liberal nomination in Don Valley North. Madam Justice Hogue determined that there were, quote, well-grounded indicators that Beijing interfered in the nomination to help the current member for Don Valley North secure the nomination. Well-grounded indications that Beijing interfered in that nomination to help the member for Don Valley North win the nomination. Think about that. And think about when those first reports of Beijing interference came to light in the media and how the Prime Minister and certain members of this committee responded to that. They said, essentially, that the report wasn't true.
But he doesn't
that
read his
the member
briefs.
for Don Valley North was a great member of the Liberal team. They launched personal attacks on certain members of this committee who dared to ask questions about the fact that there was a sitting member of parliament that was facing allegations that Beijing had interfered in his nomination to help him secure the nomination. It's quite interesting that the Prime Minister no longer utters the name of the member for Don Valley North. He can't utter his name. They no longer talk about the fact that he is a member of their team. I know a certain member of this committee, Mr. Gerritsen, has spent much time defending that member. I'd be curious if Mr. Gerritsen would do so today. I have my doubts.
He's not raising a point of order.
No. So I'm going to wait to see when the member for Don Valley North is going to have the invitation to return to the Liberal caucus. It's in the mail. Maybe it's in the mail. Who knows? Who knows? But I have my real doubts. But it's one thing that there were allegations that Beijing interfered to help the member for Don Valley North. That were now found by Madam Justice Hogue to be well-grounded. What's worse is that top Liberals were briefed by CSIS that Beijing had interfered to assist the member for Don Valley North. They were briefed during the 2019 election, 3 top Liberals. And those top Liberals were the Liberal designate for the site task force and national director of the Liberal Party, Azam Ismail, the second Liberal designate for the site task force, Braden Cayley, and Matthew LaFrance. They received that briefing at the end of September, I believe on September 29th of 2019. It was a classified briefing. And we know that Mr. Ismail, in turn, briefed the then Liberal campaign director and now top advisor to the Prime Minister, Jeremy Broadhurst, about the contents of that briefing. And it should be noted that Mr. Broadhurst had the appropriate security clearance to receive the contents of that briefing. And Mr. Broadhurst, quite appropriately, thought that the information provided by CSIS was concerning, as he has said, and he just proceeded to brief the Prime Minister the next day. As it so happened, the Prime Minister was in Ottawa, and Mr. Broadhurst briefed the Prime Minister about the contents of that briefing that next day in Ottawa. Now, what did the Prime Minister do with the information that he now had that Beijing went in to assist one of his candidates secure the Liberal nomination? A leader who was concerned about foreign interference, as this Prime Minister claims that he is, would have, at the very least, inquired for more information, but Justin Trudeau didn't do that. That would be, the very least, a leader who was concerned about countering foreign interference, about the integrity of our democracy, about the threat that Beijing posed would have done. With the information that the Prime Minister had, I would submit the appropriate course of action for the Prime Minister to have taken would have been to have removed that individual as the Liberal candidate for Don Valley North. But the Prime Minister didn't even ask any further questions, let alone take the appropriate action, or what I would submit to be the appropriate action, that at that point, that individual should not have been the Liberal candidate for Don Valley North. Instead, the Prime Minister did absolutely nothing. He gave a pass to the candidate, allowing his name to stand as the Liberal candidate in the 2019 election. Madam Justice Hogue concluded that Justin Trudeau did so out of concern of, quote, direct electoral consequences, closed quote. Direct electoral consequences of removing the candidate, a candidate that had been assisted by Beijing, a candidate that the Prime Minister had been briefed about having been assisted by Beijing, and the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was more concerned about his own electoral interests and the electoral interests of the Liberal Party of Canada than protecting our democracy from Beijing's interference.
True. He was. It's true.
Those aren't my findings. Those are the findings of Madam Justice Hogue, that the Prime Minister did it out of concern for direct electoral consequences. Direct electoral consequences to whom? To him. I would submit, Mr. Chair, that it says everything Canadians need to know about this Prime Minister and is further evidence of his complete and utter unfitness to hold the high office that he serves in. This is a Prime Minister who...
Sorry, is this a point of order? Mr. Gerritsen, is this a point of order? Mr. Gerritsen?
Specifically. No. It's not on the topic of...
Guys.
Point of order.
Is this a point of order?
This is a point of order.
Okay. The floor is yours on your point of order.
Although Mr. Cooper is trying to amend the motion in order to talk about foreign interference, all he's really done is he's attempting to amend the motion in terms of timing. This doesn't give him carte blanche right to just start talking about foreign interference. He can talk about the timing of it. He can filibuster in that regard in order to prevent it, but I don't think he is on topic by talking about the content of another report or another study, which is what he's trying to do.
On the same point of order,
Mr. Cooper,
Mr. Chair, the objective purpose of the motion, of the sub-amendment to the motion that I have put forward, is to prioritize this committee's study on foreign interference. The basis of that prioritization is the findings of Madam Justice Hogue's report, which raises the need for parliamentary oversight and accountability. And so,
Okay.
it,
Okay, colleagues, time out. Time out. So, Mr. Cooper, I think if we can get you to wrap up on the point of order, and then the floor would be yours again, of course, in relation to the sub-amendment that you have moved. I do want to remind colleagues of two things. One, of course, is the respectful dialogue that we expect between one another, and the other one is in relation to the hard work that the interpreters have to do, and it's very difficult for them to keep track of conversations on both sides of the table. So, Mr. Cooper, just so I understand, are we done on your point of order to the point of order?
well, I reply to the point.
I know, but I just
Yes.
want to be clear. Okay, point of order is concluded, and Mr. Cooper resuming on the debate in relation to the sub-amendment that you've moved.
Right. Again, speaking for you, Mr. Chair, prioritization. The Liberals and New Democrats seem to prioritize themselves. Conservatives want to prioritize protecting our democracy from Beijing's interference and seeing that Canadians get the answers that they deserve about some of the very, very troubling findings of Madam Justice Hogue's, contained in Madam Justice Hogue's first report. And going back to the Prime Minister's involvement and how he responded to the information that CSIS had passed on to his top officials that in turn was passed on to him about Beijing's interference in the Don Valley North nomination. I know that it's something that Liberals no longer like to talk about because, of course, of the Prime Minister's culpability. They were very interested in talking about that member a year ago, not so much anymore, and we saw an effort just moments ago by Mr. Garrison to try to shut me down from talking about the Prime Minister's actions in the Don Valley North Liberal nomination. Not only did Madam Justice Hogue find that the Prime Minister made his decision to ignore the CSIS report and intelligence about the member, that it had an impact on the overall election in Don Valley North. That, in fact, it affected, to quote Madam Justice Hogue, Prime Minister's decision, quote, affected who was elected to Parliament, close quote, in Don Valley North. And so the Prime Minister, in turning a blind eye to Beijing's efforts to assist someone win the Liberal nomination and his decision to allow that individual to continue to stand as a Liberal candidate, resulted in someone who happened to be Beijing's preferred candidate, someone who Beijing thought would advance their interests in Ottawa to get elected to the House of Commons. That's on Justin Trudeau. And as bad as all of that is, speaking to the need for why we need to prioritize our study on foreign interference, it was also recently reported in the Globe and Mail, based upon a senior national security source, that the same Liberal candidate, the current member for Don Valley North, was tipped off that he was being monitored by CSIS. In short, the classified CSIS briefing, contents of that classified CSIS briefing that was provided to three top Liberals, all within the Prime Minister's inner circle, Jeremy Broadhurst and the Prime Minister, who were informed of the contents of that briefing. One of those five Liberals, likely leaked that classified information that resulted in the member for Don Valley North being tipped off that he was being monitored by CSIS. this is a very, very serious matter. The report in the Globe and Mail contains very, very serious allegations that the member was notified, tipped off, because if that is true, and there's every reason to believe it is true, then one of those top Liberals would have leaked that classified information. And in doing so, the leaker broke the law. They violated the Security of Information Act, multiple sections of the Security of Information Act. They could face up to 14 years behind bars for contravention of multiple sections of the Security of Information Act. So it's about as serious as it gets. Not only did they violate the Security of Information Act, they betrayed their oath of secrecy. They undermined an active intelligence operation into Beijing's interference, and perhaps most concerning, they compromised CSIS's sources and methods. Compromised CSIS sources and methods that could have potentially put persons' safety at risk. That is the consequences. That is the gravity of the crime that someone in the Prime Minister's inner circle committed if the report in the Globe and Mail is accepted. And if the Prime Minister or his inner circle would say that the story is false, then they can come out and say so. They can come and testify before this committee. But I think that it's important that when there's a credible report in the Globe and Mail from a top national security source that someone in the Prime Minister's inner circle leaked classified information, potentially the Prime Minister himself, that compromised an ongoing intelligence operation and compromised CSIS's sources and methods and committed an offense that is punishable by up to 14 years behind bars. This committee studying foreign interference ought to have some hearings to get to the bottom of exactly what happened with respect to that alleged leak.
So true.
And and so it just on and on it goes. And Madam Justice Hoag's report wasn't, and some of the damning findings in her report are not limited to what happened in Don Valley North. Mm-hmm. We know that when reports of Beijing's interference came to light, the Prime Minister repeatedly downplayed the extent of Beijing's interference.
Mm-hmm.
He
still does.
Falsely stated that, quote, every single constituency election integrity held, and it was free and fair, close quote. Those were the words of the Prime Minister. Madam Justice Hoag concluded otherwise. She found that there were strong indicators, those are her words, strong indicators, that Beijing interfered in the Steveston-Richmond East riding to work against the then sitting Member of Parliament, Kenny Chiu, and to help elect the Liberal candidate who is now the current member for Steveston-Richmond East. And not only did she conclude that there were strong indicators that Beijing interfered in Steveston-Richmond East to work against Kenny Chiu and to help the Liberals, but that there was, quote, a reasonable possibility, close quote, that this interference resulted in the defeat of Mr. Chu in the election of the Liberal candidate, the now member for Steveston Richmond East. So much for the Prime Minister's claim that every single constituency election integrity held, and it was free and fair. That's simply not the case. Election integrity held in terms of the overall result. Yes.
But not at the riding level.
Election integrity did not necessarily hold in every single constituency election. It is evidence that there was serious interference that could have tipped the scales in certain ridings. And that is consistent with the reports that the Liberals spent so much time last spring and last fall dismissing, saying that, when there were reports that Beijing had targeted several ridings for the purpose of defeating Conservative candidates and electing the Liberals, the Liberal response was to say, no big deal, it really didn't happen. There was nothing significant.
Yeah. It's
because
a conflict of interest, like what I was saying earlier.
The election integrity in every single riding, as the Prime Minister said, held. Well,
he's
not
the
true.
Prime Minister, right? So
and
he's not going to say that
again,
one of his
I
candidates
emphasize
had
that
foreign interference.
Beijing's interference did not impact the overall election result, but I think most Canadians would be concerned. I know I'm certainly concerned, but if the result in even one riding were impacted by Beijing's interference or the interference of any foreign state, it would be something that is unacceptable, that undermines the integrity of our elections, and that needs to be addressed, and that steps must be taken to ensure that such interference doesn't take place, and that those who were involved, who were complicit in such interference, are held accountable.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, there's no
scope
accountability in this government.
Beijing's interference in Steveston, Richmond East, consisted of a disinformation campaign. A disinformation campaign that very much targeted Kenny Chu. And it was targeted at, not surprisingly, given that it was interference from Beijing, at Chinese-Canadian voters, the Chinese-Canadian diaspora, which in the Steveston Richmond East riding, which comprises of a significant component of the population of the electors in that suburban Vancouver riding. Now, as concerning as it is that there was interference in Steveston Richmond East, in which there was a reasonable possibility that such interference resulted in the defeat of Mr. Chu in the election of the current Liberal member, it's not as though the Prime Minister, the Liberal Party, the Liberal candidate were bystanders in this interference. They, in fact, were participants in Beijing's interference. Last week, at the Ethics Committee, of which I sat in on at that meeting, the committee heard evidence from Mr. Chu that the Liberal Party and the Liberal candidate amplified Beijing's disinformation, and that the Liberal Party actually created various disinformation products that were then disseminated throughout the Steveston Richmond East riding that had the effect and were intended to amplify Beijing's disinformation. And what was Beijing's disinformation? Well, one aspect of the disinformation was to claim that a private member's bill that Kenny Chiu introduced to establish a foreign influence registry would somehow target Chinese Canadians, a complete falsehood. We have a bill now, again, what a surprise, just after the report of Madam Justice Hogue, where the Liberals have introduced legislation to finally establish a foreign influence registry. I think it's been well recognized by experts on matters of national security that a foreign influence registry is sort of the bare minimum of what should be done to counter foreign interference. Other countries have passed foreign influence registries. The United Kingdom, Australia passed a foreign influence registry in 2018. The United States has had a foreign influence registry since the 1930s, I believe 1936 or 1938. But in the 2021 election,
For almost 100 years
Justin
behind.
Trudeau and the Liberals not only opposed a foreign influence registry, but were amplifying Beijing's disinformation to target a Chinese Canadian member of parliament or someone who came from Hong Kong, Kenny Chiu, who came to Canada to build a better life for himself and his country and rose to serve in the House of Commons. And Liberals amplified disinformation to target him, to sow confusion within the Chinese diaspora community, to create fear, all very calculated
I'm surprised
to
the Liberal
cause
hasn't
Kenny
exploded
Chiu
yet.
maximum political damage and to win on the basis of what amount to lies.
Point of order.
Here we go.
Mr. Cooper, just going to pause you for a moment, please. Ms. Romanado on a point of order.
Yes, understanding Order 18, it is not permitted to attack the integrity of a member, and he's accusing members of the Liberal Party, myself included, of spreading lies. I ask him to withdraw that statement. I have
she's fired
never,
up.
Michael,
ever sent out disinformation, and I take great offense with being accused of doing so otherwise. So I ask the member to please withdraw that statement.
Aw, she's
On the same
mad.
point of order.
So, colleagues, I know I'm new to the chair today, so I'll just ask. I know you've known each other for a long time, but please don't begin your response until I've granted the floor. It just helps me to maintain control and order. Mr. Cooper, in response to Ms. Romanado.
In response, Mr. Chair, it appears Madame Romanado was not listening carefully to my submission because I never made such an accusation with respect to her. I merely repeated the testimony of Kenny Chiu that the Liberal Party in the riding of Steveston, Richmond East, amplified Beijing's information and created disinformation products. Disinformation amounts to untruthful, deliberate disinformation, misinformation, and that amounts to spreading falsehoods, spreading lies, doing so deliberately. That is the evidence of Mr. Chiu at committee. That is what I repeated.
Okay, so that concludes your response to the point of order. Ms. Romanado, are you satisfied with that response, or did you want to, on another point of order, speak to this?
I do not want to further speak to this. However, I would ask my colleagues to be judicious. That is the whole point of the study that I put forward.